Good afternoon, friends. So we have here Sri P. Sainath. He is definitely a person who needs absolutely no introduction, but he has done a very recent book on the last heroes, the foot soldiers of Indian freedom. I think it's everybody knows about the leaders who have been published in the mainstream, but this is a very important book that documents the life and the role of the very small numbered freedom fighters who are still alive. And I think some of them have passed away by the time this book came out, in fact. So I think today we are going to have a conversation with Sainath on particularly about two freedom fighters. One is Alluri Seetha Rama Raju. Alluri Seetha Rama Raju is a revolutionary who inspires everyone in the country, particularly the people in the Telugu speaking states. And this is his 100th year of his martyrdom. So 99 years have been passed since he has been a martyr. And the second freedom fighter is Srimati Mallu Swarajyam, who hails from this land, who at a very young age took up arms against the oppressive rule of the Nizams. And she fought them, and in the later stage of her life, she continued her revolutionary rigor. She was in the forefront of the anti-Iraq movement in this region, and she is known for her contribution about the upbringing of the women's welfare and a significant number of legislations that have happened in the interest of the women. And she was an elected member of Legislative Assembly also in the state of Andhra Pradesh, the composite state of Andhra Pradesh. So welcome, Sainath Garu. In the first, I think you also hail from your ancestral place is also very close to the Mannam rebellion, and also your village is also close to the village of Sri Alluri Seetha Rama Raju. So I would just like to hear from you about him and his role.
See, I should clarify that Alluri Seetha Rama Raju is not part of the book. He's mentioned in the chapter on Mallu Swarajyam, because in this book I have only put in characters whom I have personally spoken to, personally interviewed, and who are still alive. That said, even Mallu Swarajyam, all of them were greatly inspired by Alluri Seetha Rama Raju, one of the most colorful, romantic characters of Indian revolutionary history. There is still things about him we don't know. There's a 4-5 year period when he just goes off, goes into the Himalayas or goes to Punjab or Bengal, and we still don't know properly where all he went. But this fantastic character also seems to come from an unusual background, though he was a Kshatriya family, and the unusual background is that his father's profession is listed in 1897 as photographer.
Wow, photographer.
I don't know. You must have needed at least one entry which I saw. You must have needed an elephant to carry your equipment in 1897, photography equipment.
And also a lot of firecrackers so that the lightning light.
I remember reading this distinctly even when I was in college, but I never studied that further. So I don't know how accurate it is. They were certainly landowners, and though coming from the upper caste, Rajus, and Kshatriya, his entire character, this person was very deeply moved by the misery of the Koya tribals, and he placed their welfare above that of his own community or caste. Many, many things about him that, say, even Indians and Andhras do not know. For instance, that this was the first person to engage the British, and the first time the British were engaged in, I think, in India and the Asian, certainly in South Asia, in guerrilla warfare, which he excelled at. Now, the astonishing thing about him was that at no point did he have, to my knowledge, no point did he have more than the maximum number of people he had with him was 60, 80. And he was defeating much larger British contingents and garrisons and things. His principle was that of the guerrilla warfare. That is, you disappeared among the sea of the masses. So suppose they were going to attack one particular British entity or a police station or whatever. He would have maybe a dozen people with him, maybe 15 people with him sometimes, maximum 50, 60. And the villages nearby, they would all come in. The villagers would come in. They knew the territory, they knew the place. There would be the attack on the British garrison or security force, and then everybody would simply melt into the forest. So it's much more difficult to track 10 or 12 people than it is to track 200 people. So they would move on the station, they would come in there, they would attack, and they would simply disappear, because each of those people would go to a different village and act as if he had not been anywhere. In the last 20 years, my experience, 1997, 50 years of Indian independence, I went back to Rampa Chodavaram, where the first attack takes place on a police station. And I had a very funny conversation with the police. Even now there is a wall where the bullet holes are. The bullets are embedded in the wall. I think they may have removed the casings, but you can see the bullet holes. That wall mercifully has been preserved. The police station has been renovated. It's old, but it's been renovated. So some of the marks of the attack over there, those have gone. But this wall is still there with the thing. Now I went in a period of high tension in 97. There was, greyhounds and all these things were going on. I went in a jeep with my friends. The policemen in the station, seeing us coming, panicked and went for their guns and into position and into the station. Then I said, press walande, we are all journalists, and this thing, and that sub-inspector looked at us, he said, then he was convinced and he said, Randi sir. So I asked him, why are you so panicky when you're seeing 3-4 of us, you are all armed with weapons, and I said, your attack happened 75 years ago. He said, who knows, sir, it could happen again this afternoon. ఇవాళ కూడా అవచ్చండి.
So the ghost of Alluri Seetha Rama Raju still haunts them.
Though he was talking about the Maoist, this thing over there, ఇవాళ కూడా అవచ్చండి. So that was the situation when we met him. I went and found that the Samadhi of Alluri Seetha Rama Raju was they were not paying the salary to the man looking after it. And that old man, I asked him, you have not been paid your salary for so long, more than a year, 2 years, but why do you keep coming here? He said, Seetha Rama Raju Garandi, Alluri Garandi. How can I not look after his Samadhi? That story got, in Times of India, it got his salary was paid. It's all it achieved. His back wages were paid. Extraordinary character of this person. In a period, he did things that you will not see men, Indian male will not dare do today, which is, his name was not Seetha Rama Raju. His name was Chandra Raju. His name was Alluri Chandra Raju. His beloved, whom he was to marry, her name was Seetha. She died, and we really do not know how she died, but she died very young. It was not uncommon for, millions of Indians to die young. Your 1921 census shows that your life expectancy was 21 years and 9 months. And she was 17 or something. She died, and when he came, she was dead. Alluri Ramachandra Raju said, from this day, my name is Seetha Rama Raju. He took his girlfriend's name, his fiance's name, and put it at the front of his own name. I cannot think of many Indian men who will do that in 2023, who would have the courage and the dignity to do that. That was one of his quirks. There were many eccentricities to him. It's very funny to see people trying to appropriate Chandra Raju as a Hindutva icon, which is hilarious. First, he was bitterly anti-caste. He was a man coming out of the Rajus and serving these.
And at a time, 100 years back, when the caste system was so predominant, untouchability was an accepted norm in the society. And we saw traces of sati also existing at parts in the country.
Yeah, and you saw also that he did not hesitate to attack the upper caste moneylenders. They were the worst immediate enemy of the Koya, of the Adivasis. So this character was those new tactics he developed in fighting the British. For 30 years after his death, the most famous British military academy, Sandhurst, the Sandhurst Military Academy, studied his tactics. How he was able to, seemingly with very few people, because what he was doing, it was not actually very few people, it was very few people with him, and he had the hearts of the people in the villages. That was how he conducted his guerrilla warfare. Another eccentric thing I said it's very funny to see the Hindutvavadi type of attempt to appropriate him, because he dressed like a sadhu. You should know this. He was a sadhu who did not wear saffron. He was a sadhu who wore red. He wore absolute red. There is some sense that, there is clearly indications that he was in correspondence with or inspired by the Bengal revolutionaries and the Punjab revolutionaries, and it is very likely that he knew something about the Russian Revolution. Yeah, it is likely that he knew something. Professor Alluri will be able to tell you much more about that. But he was in correspondence because the British were watching his correspondence, his letters, and he did receive letters from Bengal underground, as far as I know. And it seems to me that's where he learned his bomb making. The Bengalis were the founders of bomb making school in India. So the Punjabis were the Gaddaris, the Gaddari whose revolution had been crushed, whose insurrection had been crushed. So the British believed that he was in contact with the revolutionaries of Bengal. This man disappears for some years. That's why we don't know. He comes back riding a horse, dressed in red robes as a sadhu, and takes up the cause of the Koya. And immediately when you start attacking the money lenders, you are attacking the major ally of the colonial power. Who were the collaborators of the British Empire? The feudals, the Raja Rani Jamindar Log, the merchants and money lenders. There was once a triad called merchant, missionary, money lender. Merchant and money lender often became the same person because the missionaries had a different history in India. Sometimes they were with the masses, some of them. Sometimes they were with the empire. So the British also treated them brutally sometimes, but used them to penetrate interior areas. So when I read some very peculiar things where Alluri Seetha Rama Raju, I thought this was another eccentricity. Alluri Seetha Rama Raju is telling the tribals to give up liquor. Now that seemed to be a really stupid thing to do. Okay, tribals have their wine. Many years after I read that, I realized that he had a reason for it. I was sitting in 97 in the Gautami library, the archive and library in Rajamandri, just close to the river,
yeah.
Very close to the river. There I found instructions from the political agent. There was an officer called political agent. Instructions from the political agent how to deal with the tribal uprisings. And they clearly give instructions for to freely distribute hard liquor in these areas, which is what money lenders do even today. Even today, the money lenders do that. If you go to Vizianagaram, you go to Uttarakosa, the money lenders still do this with the tribals. They get them hooked on hard liquor, not the wines that they have. Here, I think, even, I don't know if it's happening now, but even 15 years ago, state was selling liquor in sachets.
Better packed.
Better packed.
It is better packed, but we still do it.
Selling liquor in sachets. So this is a thing that starts with the British political agent to demoralize the Adivasis. That they are also reaching them through the money lender who has access and contact with them. So that's what they did. So when I read that, I understood that this man had there was some thinking. It was not just a purely eccentric action. Until then I was thinking that it is just an eccentricity. Even the other eccentricity shows up in other ways. In 1923, I think, the Kakinada Congress the Congress Party's conference is held. Session is held in, I think, Kakinada. There are many accounts that he went there dressed as a Sardarji and stood up and made a very fiery speech. I knew two people personally who were very young at that time and were present at that conference. By the time I read about this, both of them were gone, but I remembered that one of them mentioned it. One was my paternal grandfather who's from Kakinada, Palagumi Jagannath Rao, and the other was V.B. Giri. And with Giri...
Information of the audience, the former president of India, V.B. Giri, happens to be his grandfather.
And so they were both probably, I felt jealous later that they must have been present at that scene, but I didn't know to ask my Kakinada grandfather. I didn't know. At that time, I didn't know that this had happened. I read it later, I think in Murali Alluri's, in his research project, I read it. My maternal grandfather said that he was very inspired by Alluri and things. Then comes, that was the other thing is that his equation with the Gandhian movements. Sometimes he is very critical, and at other times he says, he does his puja in his way, I do my puja in my way, we go to different gods. We are praying to different things like that. Now, the British start getting into serious problems. They are unable to quell this man. And now he has become bigger than life. He is already a legend in the tribals. And that legendary status is reaching the non-tribal sections also. I believe that every child in the state has either recited a poem or sung a song about Alluri Seetha Rama Raju. So it was getting too hard for them to handle. They tried tactic after tactic to defeat him.
But here, Sainath, the fundamental thing is, for a small set of 60 people, it was very surprising to see that telephones, which were only there to connect between all the presidencies, or you could say Madras, Calcutta and Delhi at that point in time, but they almost have laid the cables till Rampachodavaram, Chintapalli and all these regions. Do you think communication, was it so coordinated, and can you shed some more on what did the British do, establish some of these things on how to capture it?
They did all sorts of things. They put up garrisons, semi-garrisons. Their communication, remember, they had the telegraph. In fact, in 1857, when the uprising of 1857, it was not a sepoy mutiny, it was an agrarian uprising. The soldiers who revolted, who is the Indian Jawan? The Indian Jawan is a Kisan in uniform. He had to reflect the mood of his villages. So it was not people of Meerut, Kanpur and Lucknow who revolted. It was the soldiers stationed in Meerut, Kanpur and Lucknow who revolted. That's why you say Sipahi mutiny. But they were peasants. If you get the news that my entire 28-member joint family has died of starvation, you're going to want to kill the British because you know who did the damage. So, uprising ended. One of the great leaders of that uprising, he was asked, what defeated you? How did the British win? He said, it was that accursed string that hanged us all. That is what? Telegraph wire. It was the accursed string that hanged us all. So, that was 1857. So, by the time Alluri's Rampa Fitturi, Manyam, all these are happening, they have, in their infrastructure they have. How these people coordinated is something great. There is also a Gunda Dhur in Odisha, Chhattisgarh, whose rebellion I have never been able to figure out how they coordinated across few thousand square kilometers. Now, Seetha Rama Raju obviously had a very, within those 50, 60 people with him, he had people who had very close communication, contact with villages all over the Godavari. So that was their I can only assume, because they didn't have wireless sets in those days, they didn't have telegraph, they didn't have telegram, they didn't have anything. And who would you write letters to when illiteracy was near total? So it's a mystery how that communication is done. But then they attack the police station, and then they follow it up with a number of attacks on another instruction he gives, which is less known. In between, see, some of the policemen die, all that happens. But another peculiar instruction which I read that he gave was, don't waste your time, don't waste your thing killing Indians. He said, the British will count the cost only when their bodies hit the ground. Only when the white bodies hit the ground, they will count the cost. So, know who you are fighting. Now, the symbols of the British, if they were Indians, big police chief or what, that was not exempted, but he was trying to tell them, what he was trying to tell them was, if you kill a few Indian collaborators or policemen, there are thousands more to replace them. So don't divide yourselves. You focus on the British. Attack after attack, fight after fight, the British were defeated. And the Koya tribals, whose heroism was really what inspired him, with axes, bows and arrows, axes, bows and arrows, spears, whatever pathetic weaponry they had, they fought them. I think that he started the attack on the police stations deliberately to grab those weapons of the British. That was clearly the reason for attacking the police stations. Many years later, there's a woman in the book who does exactly that. Her name is Hausabai Patil from Maharashtra. So then they collect weapons and they start learning how to use these weapons. It's worth a visit to the Gautami library to see the turmoil and chaos, because it was turmoil and chaos. The British must have had a huge force of agents just trying to penetrate that movement and the uprising. Because there are many letters to the political agent, many notes from the political agent to the collectors and others. He is doing this, he is doing that. And he really sets the Godavari on fire. By the way, that was always a rebellious region. It still is. But he sets the Godavari on fire with this. Finally, they are just unable to quell it. Then they bring in the nastiest most brutal and cruel police force in the country, which even the Nizam uses later. The Malabar Special Police. Now, why? Because being Malabar police, they know the jungle. It's not their jungle, but they understand jungle.
The terrain.
They understand jungle. They are better equipped and trained to fight in the jungle. So they bring this. They are still not able to curb it. But the Malabar police unleash terror. Then they adopt a policy of almost genocide. What they do is, whichever were the near villages to an attack, they massacre the villagers in dozens and hundreds. They just massacre them. They take many of the adult males and deport them to Andamans. Now, suppose you are an Koya tribal from dense forest in the Godavari, and you go to the Andamans, even if you are released at time of independence, you don't know how to come back. If you were released before independence, you had no chance of coming back. So maybe you spent 10 years in the jail, you are released. I believe that several of the descendants, several people in the Andamans, apart from the native tribes, I believe there are several people in the Andamans who are, not a huge number, but small number, who are descendants of the Andhra Adivasis who were deported to this. That's my personal belief, because my question is, how would they come back? 1921 or so, you're taken and sent there. 1930, you're released. Do you know where Andhra is on a map? Do you know where you were which point you were deported from? Yes, you could probably work it out, but it would be particularly difficult for them. They were not connected to the other groups of society who could help them. So they brutalized them with unbelievable barbarity and cruelty. Here again, we don't know exactly how the end came about. One story of his end was that he was betrayed, led into a trap and killed. This I do not believe is true. I mean, betrayals may have happened, but I don't believe that his death came in that fashion, that they attacked him and killed him. What we know from oral tradition, from popular belief, is that he virtually gave himself up. Because he was unable to take the reprisals against the villages. So he said, they are coming for me, but they are killing you. And this I believe I cannot prove it for you, but the fact is,
But even the research paper concludes.
yeah, but the word goes out to the British that he is sitting there under the tree and he is sitting in a yogic posture in Padmasana. Yeah? When they come. He doesn't try to flee. He doesn't run. He doesn't do anything. He realizes that they've come for him, but the villagers are being massacred. So they kill him on the spot, and the senior officer gives the order, destroy the body immediately, bury or cremate or whatever, because otherwise there will be an uprising around this body. If there is a symbol, his body is there, it will be the symbol of the next uprising. So they bury him or kill him or whatever. But they shoot him on the spot. They kill him on the spot. They destroy his body on the spot by burial or cremation. I really don't know. And then for 30 years after, Sandhurst is looking at his deeds, at his actions, at his maneuvers, at his strategy, at his tactics. They are studying how a guy with no great numbers at any one time was able to thwart the British Empire for several years. That is the Alluri Sitaram. Now, by the way, the others have also tried to appropriate him, let alone the Hindutvavadis, whose attempt at appropriation is a joke. But at that time, by the way, when Alluri Sitarama Raju was fighting, many congressmen called for his capture. In the Madras Presidency Assembly, in the assembly, one of them, who would later become the first vice chancellor of a university in Andhra, and he says that this nuisance must be put down severely without mercy. He says that on the floor of the Madras Assembly. After he dies, there is such an atmosphere, everybody writes, the Congress newspaper writes about his going to Valhalla, the Viking warrior heaven. Gandhi, by the way, wrote a very decent editorial saying that he didn't agree with this man, he didn't agree with his actions, but he hoped that every child in Andhra Pradesh, every child would be born with the spirit of Alluri Sitarama Raju.